Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Waters.
Thanks very much, Mr Acting Deputy President. And I rise tonight to speak about an issue that all of us here in the chamber are united in our concern about, but an issue that, despite our concern and our good intentions, I believe we're taking a backward step on. We must face the truths about domestic violence, and we must be mindful of the impacts that every one of our laws and policies have on this important issue. Because every woman who dies through domestic violence is one too many, and we in this chamber have a responsibility to try to lead the push for cultural change to prevent violence against women and their children. Sadly, it is my view that this government is not effectively fulfilling that responsibility. The Abbott government's budget cuts threaten to trap women and children in violent homes. Brutally, the Abbott government is seeking to abolish the National Rental Affordability Scheme. And whilst women's refuges provide some immediate accommodation for women and children fleeing domestic violence, they're already struggling financially to keep up with the alarming demand, and they can only offer short-term housing. Once that short-term refuge accommodation is up, many victims will have nowhere to go, and with no safe, affordable, long-term housing options for accommodation, this means that, sadly, they will simply have to return to their abusive partners and live with the threat of more violence. The National Rental Affordability Scheme helped women to escape this fate, but that has been cut at the hands of the Abbott government. This government's budget also threatens to cut tax support for single parents, which again could see women financially unable to start or maintain a new free life with their children. Domestic violence infiltrates all parts of society, and while victims have varying levels of financial means, a common feature of abusive relationships is control, and often abusive partners control their victims' money. That's why the Abbott government's GP co-payment is so sinister. If a victim of domestic violence cannot see a doctor for free, she may not go at all. Firstly, because she may not be able to afford it, and secondly, because even if she can afford the fee, she may need to ask her abusive partner for the money. And of course, he is probably the reason that she needs to see a doctor in the first place. Think about that control of money in the context of the Abbott government's cuts to community legal centres. Many victims of domestic violence cannot afford private legal advice, and again, even if they could, they might not have control over the funds to secure the advice. That's why free legal advice for victims of domestic violence is so incredibly important. Now, yesterday I attended the National Family Violence Prevention Legal Services Forum here in Parliament, hosted by my colleague, Senator Nova Peris from the Labor Party, at which the Minister assisting the Prime Minister on Women, Senator Cash, also attended. Now, this organisation provides much-needed legal advice to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women across the country with a focus on rural and regional areas. And of course, we know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are incredibly 31 times more likely to be hospitalised from domestic violence. At the forum, the convener of the National Family Violence Prevention Legal Services asked Minister Cash to explain why the government was inflicting so much funding uncertainty on this organisation, despite their utterly crucial and their 100% frontline work. Sadly, the minister's only response was to talk about the budget crisis, which this government has confected so that they can punish and take from the most vulnerable while they give to the big end of town. And sadly, with cuts to legal services, housing, single-parent support and by making it harder to see a doctor, the Abbott government's budget is completely insensitive to the needs of victims of domestic violence. While the Abbott government has released the second action plan on domestic violence, which provides, unfortunately, only about $25 million a year for 4 years, it's ripping far more funding out of the budget from support that victims of domestic violence currently rely on. This shows a complete ignorance to the needs of women, which disappointingly is hardly surprising given the Abbott government has only one woman in its cabinet. Now, I'm pleased that the Greens have succeeded in setting up a Senate inquiry into domestic violence, and it will include looking at the impact of the Abbott government's proposed and passed budget cuts on victims. Now, I urge women, women's advocacy groups, women's service providers, non-government organisations, our police services, our legal profession, housing providers, medical specialists, and anyone whose lives have been touched by domestic violence to make a submission to this inquiry before the end of the month. And I ideally hope that after hearing from victims, from refuges and from service providers about the harm that these budget cuts will cause, that the government will back down and abandon these cruel, insensitive budget cuts. The inquiry will also scrutinise the adequacy of the second action plan to reduce violence against women and their children, and importantly whether it's appropriately funded. And also it will look at what more the federal government can do in this crucial area, both in terms of leadership but also in terms of coordination with other levels of government and with the non-government sector. We just have to ensure that federally we are doing as much as we can on this issue, because the statistics are truly horrific. 1 woman a week is killed in Australia by her current or former partner. 1 in 3 Australian women over the age of 15 have experienced violence, and 1 in every 5 has experienced sexual violence. And yet we see over the last few days there are some who appear to derive humour out of sexual violence against women. I'm really pleased that the Greens today, with the support of everybody in this chamber, passed a motion calling for wicked camper vans to remove their sexist and misogynist slogans that incite violence against women. I'm really proud that the Senate unanimously supported that motion and sent that strong message that the promotion of sexual violence will not be tolerated in Australian society. Violence against women is no laughing matter. It is not a joke to be painted on the back of a van for hire. And I'd like to take this chance to commend and congratulate and thank Paula Orbia, who was the mother in Sydney who launched a petition against one of the most offensive slogans on those vans. And forgive me, but it is just it does bear reading into the Hansard, because any reasonable person would consider it truly affronting. The slogan was, "In every princess there's a little slut who just wants to try it once." Now, Ms Orbia's 11-year-old daughter saw that slogan on the back of a van and feared for her safety and expressed those concerns to her mum. And I'm really proud that both Ms Orbia and her daughter took up the fight and started a petition which more than 120,000 people, as at earlier today, have signed, condemning that misogynist slogan, that women-hating and violence-promoting slogan on the back of the van. And again, I'm really pleased that all senators today condemned that kind of language and called on the company to remove that slogan. We found later this afternoon that the company has now agreed to remove that particular slogan, and that they've also committed to removing other slogans that they describe as insensitive over the coming months. Now, I welcome that, but I would caution against simply calling these slogans insensitive. They're misogynist, they're sexist, and they incite crime. They incite violence against women and children, and they trivialise and normalise and entrench violence against women. That's why I'm so pleased that through the efforts of Ms Orbia and the Senate today that we have sent that strong message, and I firmly believe that together we can change the culture that both permits and entrenches violence against women. We can challenge it, we can name it, we can condemn it, and ultimately we can end it, and we will.